Hi, everybody. A special big hello to those of you who've been working from home. Keep up the hard work. I'm here today to invite you to enter a competition, and it's a self-portrait competition. I thought that would be something everybody could try to enter. You just simply need to create your own self-portrait. You can use any medium, so it could be pencil and paper, it could be painting, it could be collage, you could do it on a computer. It's entirely up to you. I thought everyone will be able to get their hands on something to do it with at home. It can be any size as long as you can then photograph it and upload it onto eSchools through the folder in which you normally put your homework. It'll all be on there and marked clearly for you. I'll have some art prizes ready for the best three, and I'll also get them all together, put them onto a PowerPoint and share them on eSchool so you can see what everyone else has been up to. Now, we're quite pressed for time because I only have 15 minutes to do this presentation. So for this first task, I'd like you to pause me and then see if you can join up the artist from their self-portrait with another picture that they did. So pause me and off you go. Who did which one? Okay, well done. Let's see how you got along. And again, I'll have to go quite fast through this. I'll tell you who these artists are first of all. That's Claude Monet. He was around, this self-portrait was done in the kind of late Victorian times for Britain, which you learn about in year five. He was a French painter, didn't really do many self-portraits, so here's a rare one. This is Vincent van Gogh or Van Gogh, around at a similar time. He did do a lot of self-portraits and is a famous Dutch artist. Another famous Dutch artist, Rembrandt van Rijn, he did a lot of self-portraits in his career. This was around the time of the Great Fire of London, just before it, and that's what you learn about, of course, in year two. And here's the great Leonardo da Vinci, who did this self-portrait of himself as when he was an old man. This is around the start of Henry VIII's reign, so the Tudors in Britain that you learn about in year four. I wonder how you got along at spotting the style of the artist and whether that helped you to pair up the pictures. So maybe the first one you saw was Van Gogh or Van Gogh. He's someone you've probably all heard of, and he used a technique called impasto, which was he had really thick paint onto his canvas, and then the brush strokes were really clear. You can see them all in the background here. It gives a real sense of movement, which you might recognize in his painting Starry Night. So that's the first pair. Maybe then you went for Da Vinci. His portrait was done in red chalk, which he liked to draw in. He did two of the most famous paintings ever with the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper, but he wouldn't really consider himself a painter. He only did about 20 paintings. He would consider himself more a scientist. He was interested in everything. And here's one of his kind of inventions that he was working on. Perhaps you managed to spot the similar colours and style and join them up. Maybe the next one would be Rembrandt. He liked really dark backgrounds with quite dramatic lighting on his subjects, which you can see again in this picture, The Return of the Prodigal Son, which finally leaves Monet, who preferred to paint outside, is why he didn't do so many self-portraits. Here's one of his famous water lilies picture. It's quite hard to see the similarity in style because the portrait's quite small, but when you see it big, you can see the similarity in the brushwork and the control over light and things like that. So well done if you got all four. Don't worry if you didn't. We've just seen four artists and their various styles. Here's Pablo Picasso, a well-known Spanish artist, and three of his self-portraits, one when he was 18, one when he was 25, and one when he was an old man. You can see his artistic style changing as he went from drawing realistically through to Cubism, where he tried to represent himself as he would be seen from lots of different viewpoints all at once. So this is what he might look like if you were looking at him straight on and from above and from the side. That's what he was trying to do there. That's why he's got so many eyes. And you can see a huge departure from how he used to draw. Andy Warhol was a pop artist, so he was interested in celebrity and things being mass produced. And these are some of his self portraits from 1966, so just before Neil Armstrong was walking on the moon, which we learnt about in year one. Andy Warhol was more well known for making portraits of celebrities. Here's some of Marilyn Monroe, who was a famous actress at the time, and John Lennon, who was a famous musician. He was in the Beatles. And Andy Warhol used the same technique for his own self-portrait. Maybe you'd like to try something colourful or a repeating pattern like Andy Warhol did. Lucian Freud is a British painter. He's a very slow painter. He washes his brush after every single brush stroke, which means the paint's entirely different for his next brush stroke, which means you get this huge variety of skin tones in his pictures. You can see here, this is a picture of his mother, the similarities between them. They're not especially flattering. He could make himself look more handsome than that, and his mother could look more beautiful than that, I'm sure. But he's trying to draw out what's really individual about people. And even when he was asked to paint the Queen, he stuck to that style. It's not a particularly flattering portrait of the Queen, but wonderful all the same. I really admire his style, but I wouldn't necessarily want one of them hanging on my wall. I'm not sure Lucian Freud would be too worried about that, seeing as he holds the record for a living British painter for the most money a single painting was sold for. He sold one of his portraits for a cool £25 million. So, like I say, I'm not sure he'd be too worried whether I want one on my wall or not. Somebody certainly did. Salvador Dali was a surrealist. He's a Spanish artist, and surrealists were interested in the creative power of dreams. They thought maybe the best ideas were here in the back of our mind somewhere. They seeped into our consciousness while we were asleep. So he painted all these kind of dream-like pictures, and you can see the clocks melting everywhere. It gives it a very odd quality, and he took that style for his self-portrait here. I don't really know what this is, but I can recognize it as Salvador Dali. If I show you a picture of him, there he is. You can see he's got his trademark moustache and these dark arched eyebrows. Maybe you could do something really unusual and creative with your self-portrait. Sometimes self-portraits are used to show an emotion. So Gustave Courbet here painted this in 1843, so early Victorian times in Britain. And he was a young man when he painted this. So he was just getting started as an artist. He didn't know what kind of artist he wanted to be. He didn't know whether he'd be successful. And he was anxious about that. He was worried about the future. So he showed that in his self-portrait through his facial expression, through the way he's kind of holding onto his hair. He does look a bit desperate. And I'm sure there have been times during lockdown when we can relate to that. In contrast to Courbet, we have Frida Kahlo, who's about to come up. She was a Mexican artist who did a lot of self-portraits. She always showed herself as formidable and serious looking, even though on the inside she suffered a lot in her life and maybe felt more like Courbet did, like he was showing. But she wanted to show that she could withstand that suffering, that she could take it, that she was strong despite feeling that way. In the same year that that was painted, so 1938, just before the outbreak of World War II across Europe, which you learn about in year six, Amrita Shergill, a Hungarian Indian painter, painted this self portrait showing that she's happy and confident. Maybe that could be something you could try in yours. Gerard Takoto was a South African artist. He wanted to show that he was feeling worried too. He was worried about South Africa. This was the other side of the World War II, and the country he comes from, South Africa, was struggling at the time and had a lot of problems. And he wanted to show everyone how he felt about that through his facial expression and the colours that he used. He actually fled to France and left South Africa forever about a month after he painted this. Not all self-portraits have to convey an emotion. Marcel Duchamp, as an artist who's quite mischievous, quite playful, he created this very simple self-portrait by having a metal plate of his profile, of this side-on view of him made, and then he ripped paper using that template and created these portraits. He looks quite thoughtful in it, I think, even though you can't see his face. He also kind of reminds me as a giant at the window. But he didn't think that art had to be beautiful. In fact, here's a famous piece of his art, which he entered into an exhibition once. It's just a urinal. And when he was challenged and said, "Well, that's not art," he said, "Well, I'm an artist, and I'll decide what art is." And it got people thinking about what art is and what art can be. Here, where he's signed, it looks like he signed his portrait. It actually says Marcel de Chiravy, which means Marcel tore this quickly, showing he didn't really even make an effort for this very famous piece of art. Perhaps you could try something similar to what Duchamp has done there. Yayoi Kusama is a Japanese artist. Here's a famous piece of her work called Narcissus Garden, where she invited people to come and look at themselves in these reflective spheres and look at their own reflection, their own self portrait, if you like, Then they could buy the sphere for $2 if they like and take it home with them. Here she is much later, at the age of 80, where she's become obsessed with dots and colour patterns and pumpkins. Interestingly, she makes a lot of these kind of large pumpkin sculptures. I wonder what kind of self portrait you might imagine she would do. Well, let's have a look. This wonderful patterned, colourful, stylized portrait, and we can really tell it's her. Remember, we were looking at Dali before and his kind of trademark curly moustache, and we can recognise Yayoi Kusama because of her quite severe fringe here. When we compare it to the picture, maybe if there's something about you that's quite striking, maybe glasses that you wear or a haircut or whatever it might be, you could include that in your portrait. Norman Rockwell is an American illustrator, and he used to work for the Saturday Evening Post, which was a big magazine in America. Lots of people read it. They did a special edition about him and asked him to design a special front cover when he'd worked there for nearly 5 years. And he came up with a triple self portrait, where it's a picture of him doing a portrait, and you get to see him 3 times. Maybe you could think of something clever like that. Keith Haring is another American artist. Keith Haring, he was interested in graffiti and street culture. He used like simple shapes and colours. Here's one of his self portraits. So he hasn't taken a serious point of view on this at all. He's made it a kind of funny cartoon. We can tell it's him. Again, he's got his glasses and his short hair. We can recognize him. Perhaps you could go for more of a cartoon style portrait if you can draw in that kind of way. These two artists had quite similar ideas years apart. Much like Yoyu Kusama and her reflective spheres, MC Escher, a Dutch artist, or Isha, did this self-portrait in 1935 where he's looking into a reflective sphere, and you can see the ceiling up here is all distorted. The chair here looks like it's being pulled towards you. He made it harder for himself and came up with this really interesting self-portrait. Parmigianino, who was around in the Tudor times in England, again the reign of Henry VIII, has had a similar idea. This is a convex mirror, so convex means to bulge out slightly. You can see his hand is really distorted there. Perhaps you could try something similar in your self-portrait. I hope, everyone, that during that whistle-stop tour of self-portraits over the years, I've given you some ideas, and some of the famous artists that you've seen have given you some inspiration, and kind of let you know that self-portraits can be anything. They can be in any style, they can say anything about you. They don't have to look particularly realistic, although they can do. It's completely up to you. So perhaps think of your own idea, perhaps be inspired by the things you've seen, perhaps copy one of the artist's ideas and give it a go. And I really look forward to seeing some of your fantastic self portraits and choosing the winners. Good luck, everybody.